Hello, welcome back once again to another episode of the Contrarians. This is our regular show where we kind of go through one of the team has an alternate or odd or slightly off base choice for greatest album by a band. We're going to be talking to Dokken this week, and I've got Tim Derling with me. Tim, how you doing this morning?
Good, Mark.
Excellent. Okay, so yeah, this is going to be fun because I know you know your stuff on Dokken, so this is pretty cool. So basically, we're going to be talking about Dokken, and Tim's going to pick his favorite Dokken album. Just a quick history of the band. So this is one of the key bands that started off the whole hair metal craze over in LA, kind of 83, 84, but they kind of got in here early. They had this Break in the Chains album, which is a little bit of an anomaly. My fond memories of Dokken are really linked to hearing that and actually the singles like Paris is Burning and this kind of stuff very early on, and thinking, you know, being such a new wave of British heavy metal aficionado, thinking, this is actually better than most new wave of British heavy metal. There's something going on here that's going to be kind of big and it's going to be appealing. And what it was great production, just good, solid, sober playing, and then this very clean vocal up top, this very sober sort of vocal added to the whole thing. So there was just something about Dokken that had some star power, but of course it doesn't really pick up until Tooth and Nail. This is kind of like the big coming out party for Dokken. You know, this 83, 84, 85 period is when you get Dokken, Great White, Rat, Quiet Riot. They're all coming in at the same time. Everybody's got to have a guitar hero. So we've got George Lynch in the band as well. So you've got the foil of these guys. You've got Wild Mick Brown on drums, Jeff Pilson on bass. They do well back under lock and key, back for the attack, but there's a lot of controversy in the relationship between Don and George. They're kind of hating each other for various reasons. You know, both kind of have big egos and they want to be kind of the leaders of the whole thing. We've got a vocalist, we've got a guitarist, so it all crashes in flames. They eventually come back and they're doing well. They're a pretty big band here. They're going gold and platinum. And so they break up. They do other things. George Lynch eventually has like Lynch Mob, and Don does the Up from the Ashes. Where is that thing? I've got one of these here. Up from the Ashes solo album. Dysfunctional is this kind of cool return for them. They do Shadow Life and then move on. Essentially, George is gone, and they come back and do a whole bunch of records, which are very creditable, very good records. Reb Beach, John Levin eventually is the guitar kind of mainstay in the band. You know, there's been a lot of controversy lately with Don. I've talked to him and George. I've interviewed all those guys actually a few times, and I've got a big, long, probably one of my best of these little documents over at Zunior.com is the one I did on Tooth and Nail, and there's a lot of drama in that story, just the Tooth and Nail story. But there's been a lot of controversy over the years. One thing maybe a lot of people don't know is that Don got beat up really bad in Hawaii once. And ever since then, I think he was on the Up from the Ashes tour, or for some reason he was in Hawaii, and there was some girl situation in there. Like I think some local thought he was like getting with his girl in the hotel room or something, and beat him up really bad. And ever since, Don has had, Don's a great interview. He just tells it like it is. He just tells you his life story. He's an open book, right? But ever since then, he's had a lot of physical problems, and he's had a lot of painkiller problems and all that sort of stuff. And of course, recently now, there really is kind of the situation where he's not singing great on stage, and he's kind of, his reputation is being semi-ruined by the fact that he keeps going out and working, and maybe he's not singing so great. A little bit of the Stephen Pearcy, the David Coverdale story. A lot of the guys go through this, but Don is definitely one of these that is going through that. So that's your basic outline of this band. Big hair metal band, very well respected, big guitar hero in George Lynch, good songs, participating out there. They had a really great run essentially in the 80s, and then it's been this George drama, and then later albums that are also really good. So that's enough for me for now. I'm going to turn this over to Tim, who's going to tell us his favorite Dokken choice. But you actually now have Unspooled totally back in print, right? People can order that thing, right? Your book?
That's right. Yeah, that's right, Martin. Thank you. We have copies for sale. We're down to, as of recording this, we're down to about 50 soft covers and only 6 hardcovers. So if somebody wants a hardcover, the sooner the better. But yeah, the soft covers were down to about 50. It was a small run, but they're good to go. They're ready to go. Contact me on Tim's Vinyl Confessions on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, or email me at timsvinylconfessions@gmail.com. I take PayPal. If you're here in Canada, take e-transfer. We'll get you set up. But yeah, we do have copies for sale.
Beauty. Nice. Okay. So what's your favorite Dokken album?
Well, that's an interesting discussion that we had before we started this. And I always used to say Under Lock and Key, and that's probably still my favorite of the 80s run. It's kind of behind my head there. Very, very hair metal in their accoutrement. Even more so, if you could see above, the boys are resplendent on the inner sleeve. They spent a lot of money on that. I think that the Dokken's a band that did much better with. There you go. I think Dokken's a band that did much better when they weren't on the cover. I think they had some cool album covers. Back for the Attack's very classy looking. I always like the Breaking the Chains cover, the North American Breaking the Chains cover, because if anyone's seen the original, it's quite different. And it's actually a Don Dokken solo album in some ways. But anyway, kind of a strange band, Martin, because they occupy this strange place in hair metal where they're kind of too heavy to participate fully in, the hit singles thing, because they did have a dark European sort of minor key to a lot of their songs. And as a matter of fact, they only put 3 songs in the Billboard Top 100, and the highest charting only got to 64, which is alone yet. And but yet they were not heavy enough to go with the Twisted Sister and Iron Maiden, certainly the thrash guys, because there is a pop element to it, mostly because of Don's vocals and the melodies he writes. So they occupy this strange, they're kind of one of the most successful unknown bands, because these days, unless like us, we're just into that scene, nobody knows who Dokken is, even though they had 3 platinum albums in a row, and then the live album even went gold on those fumes. I don't know if Breaking the Chains ever certified or not. It wouldn't surprise me if it was close to gold, but they did really well. Yeah. They were on Elektra Records. They had Q Prime management, they had big time production. At Michael Wagner, Tom Werman produced Tooth and Nail, Neil Kernan. They were up there, and they were on all the big tours, and they were just it's been many times said, just at the brink of breaking through so they could headline their own. And they break up. It's a
just
wonder.
To interject for a sec, Tim. That debut came out on Career Records, Saxon's label in Europe, and I bought it back then, 1981. So in many ways, that's really the first hair metal album of all time. Because, I think it's closer to a hair metal album than Too Fast for Love, and then I don't think we really should be classifying Van Halen as a hair metal band particularly. They're kind of many different things, but really you think of that Breaking the Chains, that original Back on Career, could be the first hair metal album, and then there's really nothing. Maybe Shout at the Devil's the second one. So yeah. And it should be said, the original version on Career is a little bit different. Some of the songs are like I think on the original version there's a song called We're Illegal. That became Live to Rock, Rock to Live. Some of the mixes are different. Some of the lyrics are different. But it's essentially the same album. It's a wonder that, Don and George were the Tyler Perry or the Plant Page, but never got along. And then I don't even know how. It's amazing they lasted as long as they did to get the record, because they just never got along. There's just diametrically opposed personalities. And you read some of the stories, and I think I read an interview, it was in your big book of hair metal, where, Don would say, on a night that Don was singing particularly well, George would turn his back to the audience. And then when Don was having a bad night, George was sort of playing to the crowd a little more.
really, really weird dynamics. I didn't know about Don getting beat up. That's crazy. I didn't know about that. I personally have always considered Up from the Ashes a Dokken album. It sounds like Dokken. You know, he's got some of the songs were holdovers from Back to the Attack. Like, you got a song that's co-written. I think the song Stay, and then there's 1,000 Miles Away. Those are total Back for the Attack type songs. Like Mick Brown co-wrote one of them. He's got John Norum in the band now, formerly of Europe, who would do, I think, one album anyway with Dokken as a band. But yeah, crazy.
Peter Baltes from Accept on bass, and Mickey D on drums, right?
Yeah. That was it was a credible lineup, but such is the drama of Dokken, he couldn't even use his name, nor could he use his logo. So very strange dynamic at work there. You also have a situation where, I don't know, there was some business dealings that weren't quite. Yeah, it really, they got that deal on Elektra somehow. Breaking the Chains was not a big seller. They almost got dropped. It just so happened that Tooth and Nail caught fire. It was the right album at the right time, like you said, 84. Probably, it's a really heavy album for this type of band. I think people would be surprised by it. So anyway, they, inevitably they break up. They break up in 88 after doing the Monsters of Rock tour, where they had the misfortune of coming on after Metallica, who were just on fire with anticipation of being the follow-up to Master of Puppets, and they were going full bore all the way out, and then Dokken had to come out and follow them, and it was Dokken should have gone on first, even though they'd sold more records. I think they would have saved face maybe a little bit. And the thing about, you mentioned about Don singing these days live, he doesn't even attempt to hit the notes. He sings a full octave lower. It's very, very strange. Like, I don't know if you can see it in this shot, but the classic lineup did get back together in 2016 and did this Japanese tour, and they put this live album out. I think it was called Return of the Beast. And it's really weird to listen to because he's singing the notes right, but he's singing a full octave lower. He's not attempting anything. And it's very strange. And I keep, you wonder why he keeps beating himself up and going on the road and doing it. But anyway, and the funny thing is that more than one occasion he ropes George Lynch to join him on stage, even though John Levin's been their lead guitarist for years. Very strange. And thus that brings us to my choice for my favorite Dokken album, what I think is their best album. So they went away in the early 90s, and probably a wise decision with the advent of grunge. And in around 94, you started hearing some talk that they were getting back together. They actually put the album out under the self-titled album. And I think it only had 9 songs on in Japan, which is a market that was always strong for them. They signed to Columbia Records via John Kolodner, who had signed Don to Geffen as a solo artist. So they've had a relationship there. And they put out the ever so aptly titled Dysfunctional. So this reunites the classic lineup: Don Dokken, George Lynch, Jeff Pilson, and Mick Brown. And so it's 1995. How's a Dokken album going to do in 1995? Well, first of all, it didn't do too bad. It went to number 47 on Billboard, and I think it sold about 250,000 copies. Respectable. When you consider a band like Dokken maybe the uncoolest of bands to try to reemerge and represent themselves in the era of grunge and alternative music, alternative hard rock music. A lot of people, unfortunately, if you talk to the average person and you ask them about Dokken, if they know them at all, they probably know them because of Dream Warriors, the title song from the third Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I know it got them some attention, but you compare 87 to 95. Through it all, they put out, I think, a very, very credible album, which combines like I said, the darker, more Euro elements of earlier Dokken when they were in a heavy mode with a more modern sound. It's very well produced. Don produced it himself. He's a perfectly capable producer. He's produced other bands. He's produced Great White. He produced XYZ. I think this is I was way, way on board when this came out. I was looking for it.
there's a sampler thing of it, kind of
Yeah.
cool, eh? Little
Also have it on cassette, which is not something you see
nice.
very often.
Cool, yeah.
I don't think there's a vinyl version of this. I don't think it came out in vinyl unless it gets reissued at some point. But and I think, for the look of the band to come out and looking the way they did, say, on Under Lock and Key, wouldn't have been a good idea. So they come out and it's kind of conservative, Don Dokken and Jeff Pilson still have a little bit of long hair. Mick and George, not so much, just a regular band shot. That's kind of an alternative or a 90s looking cover shot there. So you've got songs on here that I think this is, one of the biggest cliches that came out of the 90s, I think, is the whole drop D guitar thing where, I don't know in the case of Dokken if it's drop D or if they just tuned, their entire guitars and basses down a full step. But drop D, in a nutshell, for those that don't play guitar, you lower your E string down to D, and it enables you to make power chords with one finger. And it became the biggest cliche on how to sound heavy quickly. And that's how, in my opinion, you got these bands that came later, like the post-grunge bands that really weren't that talented at all, but they could make these heavy sounding riffs. I mean, anybody could do it. And as a guitar player, it's unquestionably fun. But anyway, there's a lot of drop D or there's a lot of D on here, which I think suits an album coming out in 95. You don't want anything too bright sounding. And it's not a dark album, but it is more of a serious album for Dokken. There's no In My Dreams. There's no It's Not Love. There's no Burning Like a Flame on here. You've got Inside Looking Out, great opener. The one song that got a little bit of play was the fourth track, Too High to Fly. That actually charted, I think, on the Billboard Rock chart. And it lasted in concert for a few years after that. It actually made the Rhino Very Best of Dokken CD that came out in 95. It's the only song from Dysfunctional on here. And it's on this live album that came out in 2000, Live from the Sun. So they were even doing it in the Reb Beach period. The Maze is sort of, Don was really proud of that song. I remember reading. It's sort of a kind of a ballad, but not really. It's more of an epically slow song. What Price is a fast, heavy one. The Dokken harmonies, that's something that they were well known for too, because Jeff Pilson and Mick Brown sang harmonies. You had 3-part harmonies. Sounded really good live. And that's still intact. Now, another song that strangely got some airplay, I remember hearing it in this area, but it's when it came up on their Unplugged album, is their cover of Emerson, Lake and Palmer's From the Beginning. I remember hearing that on like an AC station and thinking that's really weird. But Long Way Home, oddly enough, they would steal that for an album title a few years later. Hole in My Head's a good heavy one. Lesser of Two Evils. Yeah, I really, Under Lock and Key is my favorite of the classic period, but I think I've listened to this more than any other Dokken album. I still think it holds up. It sold respectably for its time, but Dokken weren't likely to have a gold or a platinum album at this stage of the game, especially where, like I said before, they never had hit singles. So there weren't a lot of.
Wikipedia actually says gold for that album, and I didn't check the actual RIAA on it because sometimes Wikipedia can be wrong about that stuff.
Yeah,
but yeah, it says it went gold, so I don't know. I will look at that, but
I mean, I'd like to think so. Mm-hmm. But anybody can edit Wikipedia, and maybe it did go gold in Japan. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Maybe I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's very, very possible that it's their last album to come out on a major label. So it was out there. You could find it pretty easily in the marketplace. I didn't have to special order this album or anything. And then, after that, like a lot of the bands from their era, they dropped down. They were on CMC or they were on Sanctuary or Frontiers and these labels.
Remember also, Tim, this was part of the thing where Kolodner had Rat and Great White also back on a major label as a little bunch.
I think this is what planted the seed for Kolodner to do that, because after this, he formed he revived the Portrait label, because this is on Columbia proper. So, I mean, they had a major label distribution. It just so happened they had an ally in Kolodner who at that time still had some sway with the major labels, because he was always a champion for these types of bands. I mean, he orchestrated the Whitesnake and the Aerosmith comebacks. And in the case of Dokken, maybe they got halfway there, but this is a fully respectable album. I think it's really, really produced great. I think the, drums sound great on it. Nothing to be embarrassed about there. And I just really, really always liked this album. It's one of those cases where you heard they were coming back. And I think this is something that plagues a lot of music fans. You hear one of your favorites is coming back and you want it to be good and you want to get behind it. And then you hear it and you actually can honestly get behind it. That was the case with Dysfunctional. I played this a lot and I've listened to it of late, and I still think it's really good. And the more I listen to it, the more I think, this might be their single best collection of songs, at least the way that I'm hearing them. There's nothing particularly dated on here. Don still sang fairly well. That's another big factor. Although, I saw them once in concert. I saw them in 2000. It was Slaughter, Dokken, Cinderella, Poison. I've talked about that before. And he sounded fine in concert. It was a short set. It was with Reb Beach on guitar. He sounded great. The band sounded really, really good. So he could still sing fairly well at that point. Wasn't maybe too long after that where that started to change, but at this point he could still deliver it live. They were holding their own, although I personally think that we're not going to get off into the worst album, but I think the one that followed was too far in the alt rock direction with Shadow Life. It doesn't even remotely sound like a Dokken album, and not a big fan of that at all. But when they got Red Beast, they put a Erase the Slate. I thought that was kind of a return to form. And, the albums that they put out since then, even the last one they put out, which is Broken Bones in 2012, Don managed to get decent vocal performances out of himself in the studio. Anyway, my understanding is, like you said, all the health problems, he was singing from his bed because he was, pretty laid up for some reason. But yeah, interesting band. And sometimes, the drama, if somebody hasn't really checked them out, the drama might keep people from going, oh, I don't know about these guys. I never hear anything good about them. What's good about them is the music. And, not all their albums are great, but man, this is as good a place to start as any. And you might be surprised how really kind of smart it is for a 1995 album from a veteran band.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Couple other things to mention. You mentioned the title Long Way Home. There's also a title Sweet Chains, and there's also Shadows of Life. So they've got like three, one direct and two, side titles in there as well. I also find it kind of funny that Lesser of Two Evils near the end has kind of a ripoff of the closing sections of Still of the Night on it. Take a listen. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
So that with that, the big epic close thing, and it sounds very similar. But you're right. I mean, this is a record that that sounds like an even better version of Back for the Attack, which was a pretty scholarly record as well, and long and serious and a lot of substance to it. And Shadow Life, one funny thing about this one, I can't remember the song on it, but it always cracks me up. There's a little part where Don's singing this serious, dreamy song and he snickers. He kind of does this little laugh and he leaves it in there, and it just sounds out of place. So this is definitely the one that usually gets ranked worst. But in terms of rankings, basically, as probably is expected, like Return of Rock had Under Lock and Key first, Tooth and Nail, then Back for the Attack, then Dysfunctional, then Breaking the Chains. Chaos Spin had Back for the Attack, then Under Lock and Key, Tooth and Nail, Dysfunctional. So you're seeing a trend here. Everybody's basically taking some of those, key 80s albums first. Chaos Spin said that, let's see. Mentioned that it charted at 47, fifth studio album. Let's see. They mentioned the gold thing here too, because that's what it says at Wikipedia, and the Too High for Fly. While AllMusic didn't give the album favorable reviews, Collector's Guide Heavy Metal gave it an 8 out of 10. That's my book, so they're quoting me there. The album came out at a time when the genre of heavy metal music waned in popularity. The album almost failed to earn gold certification by RIA, despite the fact that it was one of Dokken's better albums they had recorded. Ranker also has let's see, 4 after the same 3. Yeah. So the same 3, it's always Tooth and Nail. Tooth and Nail has started bothering me lately. I mean, I probably would like it a little more on Spotify, but Tom Werman's production on that is not that great. It doesn't have bottom end. It's kind of really distorted and screechy, which is not even a Tom Werman. Well, it kind of is a Tom Werman thing from the Cheap Trick and Ted Nugent days. It's definitely not a Motley Crue Tom Werman thing. It doesn't sound like Motley Crue at all for some weird reason. But yeah, rate Your Music had it middle of the pack. Metal Kingdom fifth after the first four, all four of them. Best Ever albums had the first three, and they're Dysfunctional. So you're seeing a trend here. Sea of Tranquility, Pete Pardo had Tooth and Nail, then Under Lock and Key, Back for the Attack. Erase the Slate, so he's getting one of the new ones in there. Breaking the Chains, then Dysfunctional, number 6. We had our Contrarians folks do a little bit of a poll. Our Patreon subscribers had Tooth and Nail got 17, like way ahead of anything else. So Tooth and Nail far ahead. And then Back for the Attack was second. Under Lock and Key got 3 votes. Breaking got 2. Dysfunctional got 0. Shadow Life got 1. Erase the Slate got 1. A few comments from the Contrarians here. I haven't read these before, so let's see if they're on topic here. Let's see. Colston Veer, they really haven't aged well for me. I loved them in the 80s and was really surprised when listening again last year at how limp their sound is. Was really disappointed. Let's see. Andee, Blacksugar agreed. If not for the phenomenal solos, most of those songs are kind of a snooze. I'll take the debut Lynch Mob LP over Dokken any day. Lynch Mob was a damn good band too. That was good stuff. Let's see. John the Music Nut says Tooth and Nail is easily Dokken's best album. A lot of great songs and energy throughout. Not a weak track to be found. The power ballad Alone Again is stellar and was their first radio hit, while tracks like Bullets to Spare, Just Got Lucky, and Heartless Heart are melodic metal at its best. George Lynch's solos are fantastic throughout, especially on the title track and the outro to Into the Fire. You're right. I mean, that was really that's a good perceptive comment that in certain ways Dokken was too heavy, almost like in the music in terms of like the composite, and then Don's voice was actually lighter and more sober and more relaxed sounding than even most hair metal singers. So you got some vocal fry and some hair metal singers, and Don Dokken was not a vocal fry guy, right?
Yeah.
But yet the music, was a little closer to new wave of British heavy metal and that Euro thing, right? Let's see. Peter C. Jones says, I'm still deciding. Very tough choices. I have thousands of hours with Tooth and Nail, Under Lock and Key, and Back for the Attack. I also really love Erase the Slate. Choices. Reed Little says it's Back for the Attack for me. Tooth and Nail and Under Lock and Key are close, but Back for the Attack is near perfect. The arrangements on Tooth and Nail are just a little spare. By Back for the Attack, they had enough money to make it lush and not excessive. The songs are surprisingly muscular. Kiss of Death is the heaviest thing they ever recorded up to that point. George Lynch fires off his best solos he's ever recorded, not just the iconic Mr. Scary. I consider his solo on Night by Night to be the best thing George ever recorded under any name, including his many non-Dokken projects. While it's not on the list, I love the Lynch Pilson album. That's true too. Wicked Underground. Jeff Pilson is a better singer than Don Dokken ever was, and the album's full of great rock. For whatever reason, the follow-up Dawnless collaborations as Tooth and Nail and End Machine didn't grab TNN and End Machine didn't grab me the same way. Mr. Scary, Joe Beck says Mr. Scary Nail is my number one pick. Don the Chaldean says Tooth and Nail by a long shot. The most bang for your buck. Song quality, vocals, guitar are all top notch. Under Lock and Key doesn't fall far from the mark. It has this is funny thing about Under Lock and Key. There was a Facebook post going around. Somebody said that looked like a key, and I never thought it was a key. I mean, it's the Dokken logo.
It's the logo, but
it's a modern kind of key. I mean, I don't know if they made keys like that back then. But anyways, someone said, "Hey, that's a key." That's kind of funny. Let's see. I think Grant Arthur says, I think Tooth and Nail might have this. Jamie Laszlo says, I'm not huge on glam metal, but I think Under Lock and Key is one of the best albums. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that, in terms of tour statistics, really, it's only Too High to Fly that they played live off of this. The Maze comes in at number 31, but Too High to Fly is number 11, which would put it, pretty regular in the track list. And is it on there? Yeah.
Well, no, this is a CD called Japan Live 95. And I just wanted to count, as you were talking there, I just wanted to count how many songs they did from the album on the tour.
Yeah.
So The Shadows of Life, The Maze, Long Way Home, Nothing Left to Say. Wow, they didn't even do Too High to Fly. So 4 songs.
Yeah.
Interesting. But
from that actual time. Yeah. Yeah. So, but as time went on, it basically came down to Too High to Fly and The Maze. And I agree, The Maze is a really cool song. I mean, they're just a thoughtful band. They just did a really good job of all. I don't know. Anything left to add? Anything you want to comment on?
Well, you're absolutely right about. I've never been a big fan of the production on Tooth and Nail. It's very harsh. It's actually produced heavier than the band is, and I think that might have led to some confusion. A song like Alone Again is a power ballad, but it's very the way it's produced is very dark. It's I can't imagine hearing it on the radio in 1985 when the rock bands sounding the way they did. Like, it doesn't sound like anything from Theater of Pain or Invasion of Your Privacy. It's darker sounding than that, but great songs. I mean, you go to see Dokken live in concert, or for that matter, any incarnation of Lynch Mob. You're going to hear Tooth and Nail. You're going to hear Into the Fire. You're going to hear You probably hear Just Got Lucky. You might hear When Heaven Comes Down. I mean, there are foundational songs on there. But the fact that I don't expect a Tom Werman album to sound personally all that great. I don't expect it to have a lot of bass in it, because a lot of his albums are really anemic on the bass. I mean, even if you listen to something like Open Up and Say there's not a lot of bass on it. I think the only reason the Motley albums sound the way they do is because it's Nicky Sixx, and he's the man, he's the guy, he's the one saying, I want my bass on this. But the other weird thing about Tooth and Nail, so Tom Werman's got the production on it, but it's engineered by Roy Thomas Baker. You'd think he'd have made it sound a little better, but maybe he wasn't in a great frame of, maybe he wasn't doing the best at that point. But they're better produced albums. I mean, Back to the Attack's a pretty immaculately produced album. I think it still stands up pretty good. That's Michael Wagner and Neil Kernon. And Neil Kernon produced Under Lock and Key, and I think that's a pretty good sounding album, although, you'd be forgiven for thinking, oh, well, this sounds very 1985. I mean, it does. And I think Under Lock and Key usually falls underneath Tooth and Nail because it's perceived to be a poppier album. I don't think that's the case. I mean, Under Lock and Key, it's got In My Dreams, which is one of their charting singles. It's got ballads like Slipping Away and Jaded Heart, but it's also got Lightning Strikes Again, Till the Living End. Like, it's got heavy songs on there. And, and then Tooth and Nail, Just Got Lucky is a really poppy song. So is Heartless Heart, but they're not produced that way, right? So I think they're pretty equal in terms of heaviness or lightness. I think by Back to the Attack, I think they got that balance really, really, really well. The other funny thing about Back to the Attack is they actually recorded a song called Back to the Attack, and it didn't make the album. I've got it on this Japanese best of. It was the B-side of Dream Warriors. It's a perfectly good song, fits right in on there. Breaking the Chains usually doesn't get, I don't know anyone that's rated Breaking the Chains above the three that came after it, but it's a fine album. I just think it's, and it is a weird thing, especially on that album. Don, he's singing like, it's not even a pop, it's definitely not a pop metal vocal, but it's not even like a smooth, like a Journey or type of vocal or REO Speedwagon. He had a very, very unique sound, a lot of drama to what he was singing. So it didn't really lend itself to Nothing But a Good Time type lyrics. When they wrote the right types of songs, like most of the songs on Dysfunctional, his voice, I think, fit perfectly. And he even said he wishes he could sing with some rasp, but he can't. I've read an interview where he said that. He's like, just not me. I can't. And he's also said that he can't sing a line without vibrato, which I thought was really interesting because, as people may or may not know, he actually sang, you'd know the story better than me, but what was the story about the Scorpions Blackout where he actually sang, Klaus was having problems with his voice and he actually sang the album as a guide vocal?
I forget that whole story. I think he's still in on the backing vocals. I don't think there was ever any sort of thought that he'd become their vocalist, or, I mean, they were going to wait for Klaus. At one point they had, I guess it was Jimmy Bain in on bass, and that was a little bit of a prod at Francis to you better get your acting gear or maybe you will be replaced kind of thing. But I don't think there was really that dynamic there. I can't remember if it was guide vocal or he was in there and he was going to definitely be on backing vocals or whatever. But there's this filmy period where he's he's in Europe and he's part of all this stuff. And Juan Crucier from Rad is the bass player on the first album, right?
And so you can find on YouTube, there are clips of him performing like Paris is Burning, or it's just called Paris, actually, as a three-piece. And he's the only guitar player. So that was his vision. He actually said he thought he'd be like a Dave Meniketti, where you sing and you play lead guitar. Now, obviously, the acclaim they got had a lot to do with the guitar, crowd just flocking to George Lynch, who did come up with, I think, some really inventive solos and a very distinctive sound that didn't sound like Eddie Van Halen. It didn't sound like Warren D. Martini, utterly unique, but a strange mix of personalities. Again, it's a wonder they got as many albums as they did together.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, there you go, guys. I think this was a very good exercise, because I don't think you could fault Tim's choice of Dysfunctional. I think people really should take another look at that record and include it more with the first Classic 4. It should be part of that rather than part of anything else. And it really does fit as a follow-up to Back for the Attack, even though it's quite a bit later. It really does feel like it's 2 years later kind of thing. And everybody's kind of more mature, and a bunch of music has gone by in the world, and they're kind of reacting to it, but they're not letting it take over what they're doing, which is kind of cool. But let us know in the comments below if you agree on this idea. You can join us on Patreon. Marco's got a really cool thing going there where we do these Dark Horse panels and Metal Trivia Night, and Marco's got all kinds of freewheeling different shows going on. So there's a lot going on in the Patreon community. But other than that, I want to thank Tim for joining us again for this. This has been very cool, and go listen to some Dokken.